So, God made the world, and his voice was just like a hand. Day 1, light and dark. Day 2, sea, sky and space. Day 3, earth, hard as rock, and from the earth, green and growing things. Day 4, sun, moon and stars. Day 5, fish and birds. Day 6, land animals. And finally, and best of all, man and woman, Adam and Eve, made in God's image. And God looked at it all and saw that it was good. And he said, worship God, respect yourself, love one another, make good use of the world. And on day 7, God rested. But then the serpent spoke to Eve, a sly and crafty creature. So, God told you not to eat that fruit. Well, I say, take a bite, and then you will be just like him. So Eve took a bite, and Adam did too. And suddenly, everything was a mess. They were ashamed of themselves. They hurt each other. They worshipped the world. And when God came calling, they did not worship him. They ran from him and hid. God saw that the world was a big mess. However, there was one man who still worshipped God. A man called Noah. God told Noah to build a huge boat to protect him and his family from a great flood that would come to clean away all the mess. God painted the sky to show his hands would never send a flood again. And he told Noah to worship God, respect yourself, love one another, make good use of the world. So God came up with a plan for his hands to make things like they were, and maybe even better, so that once again all would be good. He chose a man named Abraham, and took him from his home to another land. I will bless the world through your family, God promised, and make your family as many as the stars in the sky. And he gave him a son called Isaac. He gave Isaac 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. He gave Jacob 12 sons. And when all the food in the land ran out, he took one son, Joseph, and then the whole family to Egypt, so they would be safe. And there the family grew so large that Pharaoh grew frightened and turned them into slaves. So God used his strong hand to set them free. He chose a man called Moses to lead the people. He made a way through the Red Sea. He looked after them and fed them, and led them through the desert with fire and with cloud. And he gave them rules to live by, rules that said, worship God, respect yourself, love one another, make good use of the world. And finally he brought them back to the land he gave to Abraham, where everything should have been good. But because they were also children of Adam and Eve, things got messy again. And they did things to shame themselves. And they hurt each other. And they worshipped the world. And they ran from God and hid. So God called upon his right-hand men, judges like Gideon and Samson, who had a lot of hair, good kings like David and Hezekiah, prophets, people that heard from God, like Elijah and Isaiah and Jeremiah, to clean up the mess and lead them back to him. The prophets said, worship God, respect yourself, love one another, make good use of the world. But the more he reached out to his people, the more they ran away. And finally, he had to let them go, off to slavery again, off to Babylon for 70 long years. He brought them back at last, and then God went quiet. Shh. Very quiet. Shh. For 400 years, God waited. If his people wouldn't come to him, then he would go to them. So he put on hands, the hands of a man called Jesus. And he spoke through those hands, and reached out through those hands, and those hands were just like a voice. Worship God, he said, and Jesus visited the temple regularly and taught people how to worship God. Respect yourself, he said, and Jesus never did any wrong. Love one another, he said, and his hands healed the sick and forgave the sinner, those that did wrong. And brought enemies together. Make good use of the world, he said, and his hands calmed the storm and turned water into wine. His people should have been happy, everything should have been good, but because they were children of Adam and Eve, everything got messed up again. And they took those hands, and hurt those hands, and drove nails through those hands, and pinned them to a cross. And when those hands were quiet and still, they folded those hands, and put them in a tomb. 1 day passed, then 2, then 3, and because they were God's hands, no tomb could hold them, no power could still them forever. So they rolled the stone away. But Jesus was no longer there. He was alive again. And when he went to see his friends, Jesus said, "Don't be afraid. Look, it's me. See the nail prints. These are my hands." And before he left them, before he waved goodbye, he put his message in their hands. "Go," he said, "go, tell everyone. Worship God, respect yourself, love one another, make good use of the world." And so they did, from Judea to Samaria, to the ends of the earth, to you and to me. And now we are his hands to do his work. And one day, when he returns, he will wipe away all that is messed up. And every tear with it. And the work of his hands and the work of our hands will make a new heaven and a new earth, and we will worship God and respect ourselves and love one another and make good use of the world forever.